Go to TAPgiles.com to learn dreams, engage my services, and support the channel. In skating games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and or Plus 2, there's mechanics like grinding on a rail, so you'd like grind on a rail like that, or the edge of a quarter pipe or something. But as you go, the balance will slowly shift to left and right, and if you don't keep it balanced, then you just like fall off and wipe out. And someone on Reddit was asking how to do that, so I thought I'd have a dabble. So first, let's make like an animation so it looks cool as it balances left and right. Cool. So now if we use L1 and X between these, then we're adding blends to them. So that's one pose, that's another pose, but in between it'll kind of blend between those poses. So now the more we're leaning to the right, the more we'll look like that. The more we're leaning to the left, the more we'll look like that. And I think I'll tweak this pose as well to give it some amount of balancing. Okay. So now we can like lean left and lean right, and then put that at the beginning, and I'll drag this to be in some midpoint. So while I'm dragging it, if I hold L1, then it will snap to these seconds, and then I can use L1 on that as well to snap back to seconds. So now we got this perfectly in the middle of these two extremities, and we can shorten the timeline like that. We also want to make sure this procedural animation stuff doesn't happen, because then it will be trying to stand on things and stuff. So we just turn these off, and now we can actually control where along this timeline the pose will be. So when we're playing time, it will just like play through all the poses, which isn't what we want to do. What we want to do is, so we can create a value. Let's just use a value slider for an example, and you can wire that value into the bottom of the playhead. While you're not holding a wire, then you won't see that input, but when you are holding a wire, you can wire into it, and now you can send it a percentage of how far through we want this. So if I send it 50%, then it will be 50% of the way through the timeline, and 100% is 100%, and so on. So now, while we're playing, we're just constantly in that amount of balance, or constantly in that amount of balance. But we want this to kind of change by itself over time, and it'll let us give it some randomness as well. I'll make a signal generator, and this has a value going up and down over time. And if we wire the output into the value slider, we can see what that number is. So it's going up and down, but we can like have it go to negative as well if we let the value slider show negatives. Yeah, so if now we're going from -1 to +1 up and down, as you can see here. You can also make it go random, have a random range. So when it tries to go down to this -1, we can say go down to a number between -1 and 0, and each time it will go to a different random number in that range. So sometimes it's going all the way down there, sometimes less, and you can see it kind of can go right up there. Yeah. So we could say have that go between -1 and +1 for both of them. And now it's going to, each time it reaches one of the numbers, it's going to generate a new random number between -1 and 1. Cool. But we don't want it to just go completely crazy like that. We kind of want to affect it over time. So we'll start in the middle, and then over time we'll like move a random at a random speed left or right just by itself. We also want to control it though. So if I had a controller sensor, and I'll put it onto remote controllable so that we don't have to possess this puppet to be able to test it. So I'm going to say left and right on the D-pad increases and decreases along this timeline. So if we go to this tab, we've got left button and right button, and I want to be able to change this over time. So as I hold left, it's going to go slowly further and further this way, for example. And for that, I'm going to use a timer. So if I grab that value slider and wire it into the start timer, normally when it goes positive, it will just start the timer and it will keep going until it gets to the end. But if you turn on speed mode, now you're sending in a speed for the timer to go at. So if I say 1, it's going, for every 1 real-time second, it's going 1 second on the timer. But if I said 0.5, now it's going at half speed. If I said 0.1, it's going 1/10 of the speed. And you can send it 0 and it won't move, and negative and it will go backwards. So that's the kind of behavior we want. We want it to like start in the middle on this timeline and then like go left a bit or right a bit depending on what we're pressing. So let's make this like 2 seconds and then put this in the middle. And it actually has, so just like down here we had a percentage value we were wiring in. We get a percentage value of like this fraction, so 1/2 is a half. So if we wire that into the value slider, we get a half. And that in turn sets the timeline to halfway through. And if we just remove the value slider, we can wire it straight in. And now over time, so it's playing backwards, and then if we make it go forwards a bit, then it's going right a bit. So we can control like how fast we're going left and right with this value slider. So now we want to base that on what our D-pad is doing. So first we want to just check what the D-pad things are giving us. So if we wire the left button in and we play time and press the left button, I'm actually, because I'm in edit mode, left button would undo things and right button would redo things. I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to hold L1 and then it won't undo or redo, but these outputs will still work. So while I'm holding left, it's sending a 1, and while I'm holding right, and if we put it into right, when I'm holding right, then it's also sending a 1. So we kind of want to have, so if we imagine we're behind the character like that, let me put that on the screen. Okay, so I shifted these keyframes around so that left is towards the beginning, so that'll be 0 on the timeline, and right is towards the end, so that'll be 1 on the timeline. So when we press left on the D-pad, we want to have a minus speed. We want to go towards in reverse sort of thing. And while we're holding right on the D-pad, we want to go right and increase speed. So what we could do is say have a calculator and wire right. So that'll, while we're holding right, that'll give us 1 here, so like that. And then we subtract the left from it. So if we're going right, then it'll be 1 minus 0, and that's 1. And when we're going left, that's 0 minus 1, which is minus 1. So that gives us a positive or negative speed. And then we can wire that into the value slider. Of course, another way of doing this is by using a combiner. A combiner in the default signal mode has a plus and a minus, a positive and negative input, and it will just use those as this is how plus it should be and this is how negative it should be. So it essentially does the same thing as that. So you could do wire that into the plus and that into the negative. And if you watch the timeline, when I'm holding left, it's going down, right, it's going up, and the actual timeline itself and the pose. So left and right, and from the actual direction we're going to be facing, left and right. So that's cool. but we also want this to affect the speed as well. So if we take this and add this, then that will both affect the speed of the timer. So just get another calculator, wire them in and add them. So we're adding the D-pad speed and the random speed here. So you can see it moving up and down, and then we wire that into the value slider. Or again, we can just skip that now and go into the timer. So it starts in the middle, and then by itself it will just have a speed going in random directions. So that's cool. But then we want to kind of fight it and try and get to the middle. So if we hold right now, and then left, like that. So that's cool. And we can like multiply. It feels like this is a bit strong, maybe. So we can like we can weaken this signal generator first. For example, by just multiplying it by a small number. So while it's sending -1, if we multiply it by 0.1, then it will be 1/10 of the strength on the timeline. I'll do that on the actual D-pad instead. So there's more of a battle to kind of struggle to control it. And it's a bit too hard, so I'll up the strength of that. Now, what you probably want to happen is if we get all the way over to here, all the way over to here, we actually fall off. And I won't like animate or implement like a whole ragdolling system or something. I'll just have it display something that's triggered by this logic, and then you can figure out what you actually want it to do. So when he's meant to fall off, it'll say whoopsie. So we want to like tell that when it's meant to be falling off, and we'll have it kind of go into a I've fallen off mode, and then none of this stuff needs to work then. So I can group this up into a chip and just put all that stuff in there. So this is rail. So this is the rail grinding chip, and we want to have a selector for modes. So it's got these different modes in here, and we can send it signals to change the modes, and then only that mode will be active. So it's always on A by default, so we'll use that to power rail grinding. And now like it's doing its thing, it's like doing its random leaning left and right when we get to the start or end of here. So as well as having things like music and sounds and keyframes for animation on a timeline, you can have any gadget you want on a timeline. So let's have a switch at the beginning and just make it really small. So if we get to this point, or we get to this point, that will be sending a signal. And if we play time, then it's sending a signal now when it goes bright like that. For this one on the end, we need to make sure it goes past the end like that. So like if we expanded this, it would be overlapping the edge. And then when it gets to the end, it will still be powered. And now I can move it, and I'm holding L1 to like snap it to that last possible position. Oh. There we go. And now when it's at the end, it's still lit up. And those will change it to the B mode. So I'll just add a, to keep things tidy, I will add a node over here. And this is an output node now because I put it on the right hand side of the microchip. And this just lets us route wires around. So I'm going to route both of those wires into the node. And that will say whoopsie. And then when we close this chip, we see we've got a whoopsie output from that chip, and we can use that to do different things. So we could just say show that text while we're in the whoopsie bit, but we also want to change it so that it will just lock in that it's fallen off. So if we wire that into B, and I'll drag these pins with X on the wires, and that lets us kind of draw them around other things. We're in B mode and not A mode, so this turned itself off. And then this will show the whoopsie message. So now we rewind and play again, and when it gets to the edge, it will say whoopsie, and the pose is off now because this is in that timeline. Cool. And we can also do something like have this increase in strength over time. So if we wire that output into here and set this, I'm using L1 and square on this input, and that works on most settings. And then I can just type in a number and then go done, and now that says 1. So it's multiplied by 1 and has no difference on it, and it will just be going by itself. But if we then and I think I'll make the sweep seconds longer so that it keeps going in the same direction for longer, and it's more likely to kind of get beyond and then crash, sort of thing. It kind of gets to the end like that. We'll sort that out in a minute. But now we have this multiplier for it. So if we start off at a small number, then it will be very easy to balance. But then over time we can increase that number, and it'll be harder and harder to balance, and it'll be more swingy. And then if we can even go beyond 1, and then it's like way more likely that we'll crash. So we'll start this on some number, and we're going to control this number just with another timeline. So we get a timeline, and we can actually keyframe these settings so that they change over time. So if we put a keyframe here, and we start it down here, and then we have another keyframe over here, and have it going wild up there, and then we can add a tween between them, and just expand this out. I'm using up on the D-pad to scale it up, and on a timeline that just makes it longer. So yeah, at the moment, so that's going up, as you can see, and it's affecting how that timeline is working, but then it turns itself off because it's not receiving power through a wire. So it's like, well, it got to the end, so it'll turn itself off. So to keep that on, we can add a switch, or like any other value. So like this might be a trigger zone saying, oh, we're still on a rail, so we'll keep this powered, or whatever you want. Any kind of wire sending a signal will keep this on. So then it gets to the end and it just stays. Difficulty. So this is our difficulty timeline, and at the moment it just linearly goes up. But if we use L1 and X on this tween again, we have these different shapes. So if we have ease in, it'll like start slow and then ramp up over here, and you can actually affect the strength of this. So if we use down, it'll be less like bent out shape, and if we go up, it's more bent out shape. So it will stay low for longer and then ramp up after it's been going for some time. Yeah, now let's try it. Oh. Yeah, so it just gets harder and harder as time goes on. I think I'll make it not go so hard. I'll make it go to like just under that, yeah. So you can still just about control it, sort of thing. Oh, and it fell off. And then you can have like a display. So normally these games have like an actual display above the character's head or something, showing you what's going on. So I'll have a text displayer. I'll just have it in on the screen actually, and I'll turn auto fit off, and now we can just make it whatever size we want. Now we want to kind of, when it's around the middle, we have it like that, and then as it expands, we'll go into left aligned mode so that we can expand it only on the right. And then when it's falling left, we'll set it to right aligned mode and expand it left. So we'll have another timeline for that, and this will control like so left or right. And so during this portion we'll be left aligned. Oh. And we'll make it, oh no, the wrong way around. Yeah, so we're going left, so we want it right aligned so that we can expand it left. And then this other keyframe will make this expand left like that. And then we'll have something similar on the right side where it's left aligned, and this keyframe will expand it out to the right like that. And I'll just try and make them about even going left and right. Cool, and then this will go to like right near the middle, and it will expand. So this is 3 columns. I'll make this expand to 3 columns using the L1 control. And then we'll have a keyframe in the middle for them to tween to. Like that. So as we go left, it's like showing left, and right, it's showing right. And what we could do is zoom in here and just have a couple of notches in the middle where it's not left or right. Yeah, so it's just like hovering in the middle like that. But then we can control this with the same pose stuff. So if we get that pose, in fact we can just put all this stuff in here. So I'll just double tap X, and that selects everything in the scope, or in this case the window, and we can drag those in here, L1 to snap it again, and just make sure we line everything up the same as it was, but for this new timeline. So like that, and I'll unpin it to the screen so we can just move easily closer. So, and I want to zoom in and make this wider, so I'm going to use L1 and right, and that kind of, it doesn't make the timeline longer, it just makes it look longer. So we're kind of zooming into this area. Oh, if we put it onto the clock time now, then we actually see these columns for every frame, and we can have these tiny notches. So I'll just make it 1 notch like that. Make sure this lasts the same amount. Oh, to get it to actually display, this says enter text. That means it doesn't think there's any text in there, so it won't display anything. So if we edit that and just click done, it will now think that there's text to display, so then it will render it properly. So there you go. So if we're looking over here, now we're leaning right a bit, so it's showing we're leaning right a bit. Oh, and we've fallen over. And we can put that into this timeline as well to keep it all together. And that just means while this timeline is powered, then it will show that bit of text. And we don't need that anymore. And yeah, that's about it. So now, of course, the tough part is actually making it rail grind and all that kind of stuff. But that would be a tutorial for another time. Now, if you want to go like make it feel more physical, so at the minute, if I show you the timeline, so like it's just it feels like I'm just like suddenly affecting the speed, which of course I am, but that doesn't feel like it's very physical. Normally, like if you've got some speed rotating it that way, it's going to be harder to bring it back. But at the minute, you're moving this way and then just suddenly moving that way because you're pressing the right button. So I think what might be good for that is we have like an acceleration kind of step. So this is kind of like just using the velocity, for example, where it's just there's a speed and that's it, and you're both affecting the speed equally. But if we have an acceleration of how fast that moves, then that might be a way of improving it. Okay, so if I just show you what I mean separately over here, let's just like have a value slider to display what is going on here, and turn off slider visible in scene, and that means you don't have like a UI slider that you can actually drag like that, and you can just see the number. So if we wire the result of this into there, we can visualize what's going on. Let's have this value slider representing our D-pad, and that will mess with this over time. So yeah, let's put that back in the middle. So while time is playing, and we can like affect it like that. But what if this was the acceleration, and then the actual speed? That acceleration is how fast this other timer is going to move. So we wire that into that input and then see what that gives us. So remember, this sends out a percentage, so from 0 to 1, but we want to kind of have it be negative over here and positive over here. So let's put it through a signal manipulator, which is a good way to kind of scale values to another range. So we have an input range of 0 to 1 from here, and then we want the output to be from -1 to 1, and that's it. We just drag this with X, and now that's what it does, and then it outputs that value. So we can wire that in there. So we're currently at 0. So this is the acceleration number, that's the speed number, and if we put a tiny bit of acceleration into it and then go to 0, it's still got that speed, that acceleration. Like here we're accelerating, this is the actual speed that we're going, so it keeps on increasing, so the timer keeps going up. So then we have to balance it out by going left a bit, and then slowly it goes down. But if we keep holding left, it's going to go all the way down until it gets to 0 again. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it's kind of an acceleration step to how fast this is moving, and it should feel a lot better. So if I just do that in here, so yeah, these add up to go into this acceleration. So this is how fast this changes over time, and then we scale it to be from -1 to +1, and then put that into here, and this is the velocity of how fast how fast we're like falling left or right. So now, if I turn this off completely, then we won't have any randomness to it, and we can test better. So yeah, so perfectly balanced. If I put a little bit of left into it, then it's just going to keep on falling more and more left. So as I put a little bit of energy going left, and now I'm not pressing anything, it's still falling left, and I have to push right to kind of drag it back. But if it's going quite fast left, I'll have to put a lot of time and energy going to right again, and now it kind of feels more physical, like you're just about taking it from the brink of defeat. And yeah, so now if I add that back in, try it out. So it's going quite fast left, so I have to keep on holding it right, but then I held it too long going right, and then it fell off. Yeah, And I think what I'll do is I'll have these be like here, and that be a, oh no, I'm actually falling over. Can't pose. Oh, I'll keep it, I'll push it left. No, I'll push it right. Yeah, and then it kind of gives the impression you're falling off, sort of thing. Cool. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something interesting. Go to patreon.com/TAPgiles to learn something new every day.